Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I have a guest for you today from Minnesota, Tory, and he is a digital transformation specialist, and he is the CEO of VictoriaFi Consulting. I'm really excited to have him on to talk about the digital transformation and his work. Victoria, welcome. Or sorry, Tory, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Appreciate being on here.
Yeah, slip of the tongue, but
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. They both have Tory.
yeah, briefly introduce yourself and we'll dive into the questions.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my name is Tory Bjorklund. I am the CEO of VictoriaFi, as you mentioned. Been a serial entrepreneur most of my life, and it'd be fun to talk about some of that as well. I know with your podcast, you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. The VictoriaFi is my latest company, and we just started that towards the end of 2021. And so it's a relatively new startup. But I've been involved in the digital transformation industry, consulting industry since 1987. They didn't call it digital transformation back then, but basically technology consulting and business consulting. And then also have been involved in starting manufacturing companies and some fintech and other related companies. Yeah, I've been doing technology related things for quite a long time.
Yeah. And I know a lot of, for example, a lot of hospital systems, they've been still undergoing this digital transformation to Epic and Cerner. And your clients, are they, what is your client avatar? Are they major corporations, private enterprises that come and work with you?
Mostly mid-level, around 200 million in revenue to 2 billion, generally speaking, and primarily in the manufacturing and distribution realm. Although one of the things that I did a lot of consulting with a company that was in the healthcare space. At the time, it was called Dairyland Healthcare Solutions, and then became Healthland, and then were sold. And I was going to say Cerner, but actually I'm not 100% sure now which one of those bought their technology. But anyway, I did several years of consulting with them, about 2 to 3 years of consulting with them and helping them with their product.
Yeah, fascinating. The other question I have for you is, because you talk about ERP implementations, what is that? And you have a lot of acronyms. You have WMS, MES. What are all these terms?
Sure. Yeah. Let's start with ERP. That's a common reference, and a lot of people misuse it. So it stands for Enterprise Resource Planning, but generally speaking, people think of that as the primary back-end office financial accounting, supply chain management, inventory management, that sort of thing, sales order processing, all of that. And where that comes from is back in the 80s and 90s, there was a big push for just-in-time inventory and a lot of the stuff that came out of Japan and through Toyota particularly. And one of the methods that they used was material requirements planning to get to a just-in-time inventory. And they referred to that as MRP. And then they expanded that into capacity requirements planning and called that MRP2, and then decided that while we need to really plan the entire enterprise, and that became enterprise resource planning was the reference there. And today it almost just refers to any accounting software calls themselves an ERP system, but it's really not historically meant to be just the accounting system. But then, so that's ERP. The MES manufacturing execution systems. So that's running in the shop floor, generally speaking, in manufacturing places to help with executing the manufacturing of the product, and includes things like shop floor control and those sorts of things. The other one you mentioned, the WMS, warehouse management systems. So that's another product for managing the warehouse, as you can imagine. Yeah, a lot of acronyms in the tech industry.
Yeah. And you talk about a lot of your work revolves around many digital transformation initiatives fail. So why is that, and what can you do to save it?
Yeah, it's these numbers have been tracked since the late 80s or even earlier, but they, generally speaking, and the numbers range between 70 to 90%, 95% I've even seen in one recent article in a magazine, but The primary reason, in my opinion, is that companies haven't actually done the necessary preparation work for the actual execution of the projects. Then it's often blamed on execution. A poorly made plan, even well executed, will not do well. And so that's one of the areas. And then the other area is leadership, company leadership. It tends to hand it to their technical team and say, hey, get us some software, bring it in here and get it going. And it's really not meant to be a technical project. It really should be a process improvement, business improvement type project. And so if you don't have the business leadership involved, it's also bound to fail. So that's why I think the primary reasons for that high level of failure is lack of preparation and lack of business leadership. And then, of course, the solution for that then is to properly prepare and have business leadership involved from the beginning, really.
Interesting. What are some signs and symptoms that go live implementations are in trouble? How can leaders know for sure?
Yeah, when it's already in trouble, generally, that probably the most common sign of that or symptom of that is that they say, hey, we're 80% done. And then you check back 3 months later, we're 80% done. And 3 months after that, we're 80% done. It's just, the needle never moves. And what you see internally in the project is what we call thrashing, where people are revisiting previous decisions and reworking things, and maybe new requirements are coming in, and it's late in the game and they're still trying to figure out what they're planning to do with certain major decisions. And so those are the kinds of signs that you see that, oh no, we're really in trouble. And oftentimes what happens is a company, like, for example, you think about, okay, we've invested, say, $15 million into this project. For a larger company, that's not uncommon. We've got 15 million into this and we're 80% done. It would be stupid to just throw that 15 million away by stopping the project. So let's invest a little bit more. Yeah, we only budgeted 12 million, but okay, we're only over by a little bit. Let's add another 3 million. We'll get done. And then it becomes like that proverbial frog in the water. It just gets hotter and hotter. Pretty soon you're 30 million into it and trying to make the same argument. So we've spent this much, we're 80% done. Let's finish the job. And at some point it becomes clear you just have to pull the plug. And you don't have to pull the plug, frankly, but you do have to stop what you're doing and do something different.
Yeah. It reminds me of my days as a healthcare IT consulting, and you highlighted so many of the things I was witnessing, and it was great on my end. I got job security and great pay, but it's just like there's more efficient ways. And how can AI help solve these problems with digital transformation?
That's a really great question. And frankly, people are still trying to figure that out. One of the areas, though, that AI is really good at is evaluating large amounts of information. And so, for example, if you wanted to do an analysis on your original project plan compared to what's happening, presuming that you have good data, which is sometimes quite a struggle as well. But in the projects that I've seen, that even the major failures, they have good project plan execution. They lay out the tasks and people are doing their tasks. It's just that they're working on the wrong things. And they start discovering that they're working on the wrong things by adding more new tasks. Having a dashboard that's really showing, in the software industry, we call burn downs. We call this a burn down. And showing the burn down, the actual burn down, AI can really do a good job of saying, here's the kinds of things you're continuously doing and they're not having an impact on the results. Here's the kinds of things you might want to consider doing differently. And it does a pretty good job of evaluating some of that. But oftentimes, what it can't do is make decisions for you. And oftentimes it's decisions that are poor, and it can't plan. When the ship's already left the dock, it's hard to plan for the trip, and it can't help with that. but it really can help identify when you're in trouble and where the pieces of the project are that are causing the problems.
How are you positioning yourselves with digital transformation where a lot of in a dematerialized world we're going from manufacturing to more like software and digital and artificial intelligence? How are
Yeah.
you evolving?
Yeah. The primary thing is that the process necessary for digital transformation remains the same. And I've been doing some interesting research on that. For example, there's a company that they don't do manufacturing, but they actually resurface highways and freeways and things like that. And that industry is going through major transformation based on digital technology that's available.
Oh,
And we were not involved in any of those projects, but I knew a company that was, and after they had gone through changing how they do it and implementing their digital plans for doing this very kind of a thing, we interviewed them and said, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and the list was exactly the same. So one of the things that we've seen is that the characteristics that make for successful digital transformation is the same, whether you're talking about manufacturing, whether you're talking about software development, whether you're talking about AI rollout, those kinds of things, back office work and production, whatever. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is educate people on what are those characteristics that make for success, make sure that you're involved in those, that those characteristics exist in your initiative. That's one area. The other thing is we really do have to become experts in AI. I use AI every single day in things that I do, but I'm playing with it, quote unquote, playing with it continuously. I'm trying out. In fact, I just started using, Google is rolling out their AI notebook. And I don't know if it's still in beta or not, but it's an early preview. I just started working with that this morning. So I'm constantly trying out different technologies so that I can help our clients determine what could be useful for us in what kind of a use case.
yeah, fascinating. Initially, you talked about why IT should not lead your digital transformation, and you have
Yeah.
the role of executive, non-technical. How do they help in the digital transformation process?
Yeah. The first thing is they need to drive the vision. So if you ask somebody in IT, for example, why should we upgrade our ERP system? They'll say, because it's outdated. We can't patch our servers anymore, blah, blah, blah. Those are not business reasons for spending millions of dollars. Those are risks that you need to mitigate, right? And so they play a factor in it, but those are not business reasons to spend money. And so the biggest thing is that the business has to have a vision for why they're spending the money. And truthfully, most companies think they've done an ROI calculation. Okay, if we spend this amount of money, here's where we're going to save money. Here's how we're going to get it back. But when they say, here's how we're going to save money or make money or whatever the case is that they use to justify it, they never actually measure what are we spending now, or what's our revenue in that area? How are we going to know what success actually looks like? And then they never actually evaluate it at the end of the project and say, okay, we've spent this much. Now, how are we getting that return back on this, and how is it going, and what do we need to do differently if it isn't going well? And so that's one of those areas that business leadership really needs to be involved in. They need to hold people accountable and say, hey, you promised this kind of a return based on these factors. I want to see those factors. How do you plan to measure them? What are our benchmarks that we're using to measure those? What did we have before? I've always tried to come into those projects and say, how are you going to measure success? And I had a client that said, we want to measure success by revenue per full-time equivalent, FTE. Okay, great. So this project is going to help us increase our revenue per FTE. Okay, great. How is it going to do that? What more? And then you have to have a strategy for that. And then you need to actually measure what is your revenue per FTE today. And then how are you going to increase that? Are you lowering costs? Or, you laying people off because you're are bringing in technology, or are you increasing revenue, or a combination of the two? How are you going to improve that metric? And then how are you going to measure that metric in the future? Is that something you're measuring weekly, monthly, annually, quarterly, whatever? And then if the target is we want this in 2 years to go from A to B, now you have a plan of what it's going to look like, and then how a strategy you need to have in place to how are we going to, are we going to increase our revenue? Or are we going to lower our FTEs, or what that? And frankly, it was just like somebody had picked that, maybe read it in an article or something, and said, that's what we're going to measure. And it's okay. What's your strategy to actually accomplish that? Isn't this software going to accomplish that for us? No, software is not a strategy. It's a tool.
Yeah, fascinating. How can people connect with you and learn more from you and learn from you?
Yeah, my website, or the VictoriaFi website, victoriafi.com. And that's Victoria, just like the name, and FIDE.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, just at Tory Bjorklund. And that's probably the easiest way to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My email is Tory at VictoriaFi, TORY at VictoriaFi.com. And those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for a very insightful, wonderful podcast, and I really enjoyed having you on.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.